Good morning and welcome to our last day of Mental Health Awareness Week and our chats. And I'm very excited to welcome Claire, Dave, Frank and Lucy. Thank you for joining me. And we shall see where this conversation goes. Lucy, do you want to kick us off?
Oh, I'm kicking off.
Yeah, give us your experience that you just told us about.
Okay, so I joined this meeting late, and the reason I joined this meeting late is because even though I planned everything perfectly and I should have been back home by 10 o'clock, I just got tangled in actually it was a garden centre with people not doing what I wanted them to do. And my frustration levels were rising and rising. And through this understanding, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that it wasn't those people that were making me feel this frustration and this agitation and this, I can't even tell you how it felt. It felt really explosive. It was like, I just want to get home to do this thing that I've planned to do all morning. And people were blocking me, but I knew that it wasn't coming from them, but it felt so real. It felt like the checkout person being slow was the problem. It felt like the people in front of me in the queue who hadn't got their things lined up to be checked out were the problem. And it wasn't them. It wasn't them. But I still struggle with that. I still struggle with how real it feels that the outside is making me feel the way I'm feeling. And I guess the difference now is that I at least observe that. I at least have some awareness that on a different day, that line wouldn't have bothered me at all. And if I had, I don't exactly know. I guess I might need some help from you guys with that, some input from you guys, because there are moments where my understanding helps me in some way, but I still, I don't know how to explain it. I might need some help. I still get caught up in it. I guess I get caught up in it. That's what it is. I get really caught up in it. And the difference is that I know I'm getting caught up in it.
Yeah, I resonate with that for similar experiences, and also with like the homework thing at the moment. So if I've lined it all up and it should be going really well and then it doesn't, and I get really frustrated about it. And what I've seen for myself is that it's when I'm resisting, when I've got it in my head what I want to be happening. Like I want, you wanted to get back to be able to come on this call and to do something, you had in your head something that you'd planned out and was going to be nice and all the rest of it. So when there's something put in the way that looks like it's that you don't want it to be that way, you don't want to be held up. Oh, for goodness sake, it seems so unnecessary. And then potentially like there's insecure thinking that comes up around that. Well, how am I going to fix this? How am I going to get back in time? How am I going to, I'm going to let people down. I don't know where your head went, but potentially.
No, that's very much so. I was like, am I going to mess up the recording? And there was all that going on.
Yeah. So we start taking on a lot of personal thinking, don't we? Like with my homework example with the kids is like, oh, well, the school's going to wonder what the heck I'm doing. And my kids are going to be like so far behind when we go back to school. And I should be able to do this. Everybody else is doing it. And it all becomes very, very ego-based, very about me and how I'm, it's not fitting with what I wanted to do. And I'm resisting that. I don't want it to be a different way to how I planned in my head, I think. So I'm not saying it very, I'm not sort of neatening it all up, but like, that's what I've seen around that, because I've also had experiences like that. I'm like, okay, well, I know that this can't be coming from the outside, but it really, really feels like it. And that's what I've identified, is it's still coming from me resisting what's going on. Whereas if I was just, and as it happened, you got here fine and it's no drama.
And there was also that voice in my head, but I chose not to listen to it. I chose not to listen to the voice that was like, it'll be fine. Even if you don't make it on the call. What's the big drama? But I guess I was aware in that moment of my decisions of where I was going to look. And I chose to get caught up in it. And there you go, you've hit the button on the head. That came from the inside, didn't it? That my decision to get caught up in it, rather than to listen to the voice which said, what's the big drama? What, nobody's sick, no one's, there's just nothing to create that level of anxiety.
Such
So
a
I did
beautiful
that.
example though of being human, isn't it? Because that's what we all do all the time. And it could be very tempting now to say, oh, I didn't do the right thing there, to then add another layer on top of it. Like, oh, well, I knew that and I didn't do it. And like things could have, like I'm not using what I know properly or whatever. And that's just adds another sort of big layer onto it. But we don't, because, you don't need to, because it's human. And that's what happens. We get caught up, we notice it, and then it move on to the next thing. And maybe the next time we notice it quicker or differently and something will change, or maybe it won't.
Or maybe it's just an indication of where I'm at today. Maybe my mood is not allowing me to be that, to have that space, just to stand back and go, seriously, this is not important enough to get that anxious. And I think that is a reality. I mean, how I'm feeling is indicating to me where I'm at, where my mood is. So that's where I need to be right now, is to just check in with my mood and go, oh, okay.
I think you said it earlier. You said, on a different day, I might have handled it completely differently. And it's right. Just at the moment, today, at that point, your level of consciousness was lower than, it could be on another day. And it's what I'm hearing is we're all working absolutely perfectly. That whole, isn't it? I'm always in awe of how amazing it is how we create our experience out of thought, and what that's and the beauty in that, even though we're caught up in it. But the best bit is it's that awareness. You've both seen what's happening. You've both seen it, and that awareness doesn't have a limitation like your thinking has. It's always there. And then, Lucy, you nailed it with, well, I chose not to listen to my wisdom. I chose to go the other way. All perfect. It doesn't matter which way you go. It's all, the system's working, So I think, what I'm hearing is just level of consciousness today is different.
Yeah. And within that it's so freeing, it's so liberating, because it's like there's nothing wrong with me. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just in a different place today. But I know that.
And going back to the mental health thing, it's like, you're not broken. None of us are broken, because as Dave is saying, the system is working the same way all of the time. Like it's a perfect system in the sense that it never goes wrong. Like we're always experiencing our thought in the moment, whether that comes from our personal mind or wisdom or whatever we want to call it. But like that system doesn't break, which is a really helpful thing to know. And I remember Jacqueline Hollows last year said something that I found really helpful. I think about it a lot, that it feels real because that's how reality is created. Like, I just think that's profound, our reality comes to us through our thinking, and that is what our reality is, kind of thing.
I'm imagining somebody listening to this who doesn't have so much information about this awareness. And I'm imagining that they might think, well, if it's all perfect, and if we are where we are and it's all as it should be, then how does this understanding help? Does that, am I making any sense? Because I have a little awareness of this understanding, and I know how when you get in touch with that feeling, everything lifts. Everything, I'm not being very clear here, but to somebody who doesn't know about that, can you see that they might think, well, if everything's perfect and everything's as it should be, then how does this change anything? Is that making any sense?
Yeah, I think
So I
that's a
just
really
wondered,
good point. What does this bring to the table?
correct.
What is this? What is, what are we so excited about here? Because if we're saying nothing's different, then what's the big deal?
Yeah.
To me, the difference is, and I think when I first heard people talking about this, I thought, that's not what I'm after. Because, I started out thinking this was a way to feel better all the time. This was, so I've heard you say that my feeling just comes from my thinking. Well, that's really good. If that's all I'm ever experiencing, isn't that great? But then I found out that actually the problem is you can't control your thinking. So I thought that if I control my thinking, I'd get to feel good all the time, or, at least avoid the bad stuff. But now you're saying, actually, but you can't control your thinking. So where does that leave me? Back where I was, because it's just going to kind of happen to me, and I just have to kind of get over myself. And what eventually kind of became apparent was the relationship with my experience changed, because I no longer thought that where am I going with this? There was something about how knowing that all I was ever experiencing was my thinking that shifted the regard I had for my experience. It was like, no, I'm not doing a good job with this.
Frank.
I think you are.
Yeah, I think you are.
I'm getting lost. I mean, it's a good subject to think about, but I'm struggling to think.
I think you kind of said it. I think you kind of said that your attachment to your experience is now a lot lighter.
Yes. Yeah.
And on that, what it made me notice about myself is that I think what I've got from it is that I finally see that the thought I have about not being good enough and actually my family would be better off without me has no more weight than the thought of what I have for lunch, unless I make it heavier. That's been huge. I might still give it more weight, but then it comes a lot quicker that that's what I'm doing. And I noticed that it is literally all coming in and out. I mean, I was in a bad place and I was convinced my family would be better off without me. Not that I wanted to do anything drastic, but like it was there, it came. I've had those thoughts. But now I really, really see that I didn't even need to change them. I just need to say, oh, hello. There it is again. And something in me, and I think that's the difference, is like something in me made me not follow through on those. Obviously my wisdom at the time, or my level of consciousness, had enough, even before this understanding. Something in me made me stay and just do whatever I needed to do to get through the day, rather than necessarily acting on. Do you know what I mean? So that's been profound, and I think that, I do feel that's hopeful as well. Knowing that I can notice the attachment I'm giving to something, it gives me hope, because it means that I don't necessarily have to always give it the weight I'm giving it.
Yeah, I think that the recognition that my experience is only coming from my thinking, and recognizing that is all that's ever going on, really seeing the truth of that that changes something, because when you kind of equate your experience with your thinking, and you recognize that your thinking kind of flows through all the time, then that makes the whole thing lighter, more intangible, more fluid, less solid. And so, you know, even sometimes you can get caught up in something and you recognize, oh, this is just my thinking. And that does shift your perception. You think, oh, you know, I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, is what someone who wouldn't use a three-piece understanding would say. But sometimes, like you said in your example, Lucy, it's like you knew that it was just your thinking, because you know deep down, but it also seems so real, there's nothing you can do about it. But what you do know still is that it will change. So that's kind of, that's always there once you've got to the point where you just know that your experience is only ever thought. So it, you know, the things out there don't have to change in order that you could feel at a different experience. All that has to change is your thought, and that can happen. You can't always control it, but it will happen on its own. And it's not solid. It's not running in a channel. It can go anywhere.
And that's the difference, like what we were saying before, like what difference does it make? Well, it's all the difference in the world, because it's understanding what's going on. And that's huge.
And it frees up your mind. It frees you up to see, okay, well, if I'm not my thinking, and if that isn't really relevant, what else can I pay attention to, you know? And that it sort of opens up that space before, you know, like, okay, well, I'm something more. There's so much more potential, you know, there's so much more opportunity for different things to come through. If I don't have to pay attention to my insecure thinking, I can do things that I wouldn't have done before, you know?
I think when you get caught up in your thinking, you know, it's that when you don't have the understanding, it feels like you've got nowhere to turn. You know, you feel stuck, you know, and of course we're only as stuck as we think we are. But you know, what I keep hearing is that on a deeper level, we now know the principles to be a truth. And when you know that, even when you're in those, in the throes of it, there's a knowing. You're aware of it, and there's a knowing that can't be changed for me, because I see the truth in the principles. And now when I get caught up on what's on my mental screen, I know I can turn around and look the other way. You know, I don't have to get caught up in it, but sometimes I do, and that's fine too. But we have free will. We all have free will.
And I think it's quite important to sort of say, maybe we should say this at the beginning as well, is like, all we can do is use words which are made up. There's nothing you can, you know, it's such, you can't explain it. Otherwise, you know, everybody would know of it. It's just something that's experienced through understanding how the system works. You experience it and then you know it, but it's really hard to talk, you know, to like tell somebody what it is, because it's just so intangible.
It's like trying to describe like how something tastes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like you can't do it, you got to taste it.
Yeah, that's a really good way of describing it.
Given we're at the end of the week, I think it might be helpful to kind of point to the implications for this, other than kind of, you know, your mood in the moment, because most of our conversation, certainly today, but in some of the other calls, has been, you know, how I'm experiencing now. But this, in a sense, because all that's going on in our world, you know, all that we think about ourselves, all that we think about our loved ones, all that we think about our job, all that we think about, you know, our personality, our character, our role in life, all of those things are made of the same stuff. They're made of thought. They're made of the patterns of thinking that we've kind of adopted. But, you know, as we go through life, we pick up this stuff and we kind of adopt it because it looks like it tells the truth. And once we've adopted it, we tend not to look again at whether it is really the truth. And what this understanding kind of opens up the possibility to is to say, well, you know, I've thought that about myself, but is that really me? Or is that just kind of like something I adopted somewhere along the way because it seemed to describe me? And we know we've all got this kind of capacity for, you know, finding evidence for what we believe in the world. That's the way evolution has equipped us. You know, once we've made up our minds about something, it becomes harder and harder to see something else. Except that this turns it upside down and says, no, because all that is just made of thought. And if you can see that at work on a day-to-day basis, in effect, all your life is really just a day-to-day basis. And more can start to be questioned, and that you can think, well, maybe I could do that. Or maybe that person isn't the problem that I've always thought they are. You know, the sky's the limit, really.
Which kind of is a very neat way to bring us back to the freshness, the fresh look, isn't it? Because that's the name of this platform, is a fresh look at.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody got anything else? I think something that's sort of come up for me this week has been, I can hear, you know, it came up in a couple of questions with other people. It's like, okay, well, I can see how my circumstances, well, okay, it's all right for you to say because you don't have real problems to deal with. You know, you've got a house, you've got all this, you know, you're comfortable and all that. And that's, I've seen it a lot like that as well, because some people you talk to, it can be easy to say, okay, well, they really do have problems. But what I'm seeing is the more you look at it, there's evidence both ways. There's people who are in experiences that someone might label as horrific and horrendous, who have come out either really, really low with mental health problems, with even more sort of issues than before. And there's people who've made who've come out and seen it as like a turning point in their lives, and actually they're really grateful for the experience because it's led them on to become, in their eyes, better and better and better. You know, so there's always evidence for both ways. And sort of only going off personal examples is kind of, in my experience with talking to people who've got PTSD, you know, particularly ex-military, you know, sort of there's always evidence of the person who's had a horrific injury, who's gone on to become like a motivator and somebody who's really, really helping other people, who's really embracing it and really grateful that actually if they hadn't have had their leg blown off, they wouldn't have become the person that they are today. and there's the person who's not done that, who's sort of ended up really, really fearful and anxious and depressed and struggling, which makes you think, okay, well, they potentially had the same thing happen, but something along the way made it different, and that can only come from inside. That can't be coming from outside. So that sort of opened up for me this week, was okay, well, you know, that looks like a helpful direction to look, really. Is like, okay, well, it's just more evidence that the three principles is at play all the time.
Yeah, I think the other bit that goes with that is just the recognition that there's no doubt that I'll just speak for myself. My circumstances, in terms of finance and so on, are better than many, better probably than most. And you could say, well, that means I've got nothing to say on this subject because I don't have the challenges that other people have. But what we're pointing to is not that those things cannot. We're not saying those things aren't disadvantages. We're not saying somebody's circumstances aren't difficult or challenging or, and that they don't warrant some assistance, some help to deal with those circumstances. What we're saying is that this understanding, this recognition of where our experience is coming from, and that can shift, that understanding can make a big difference to how someone sees what's going on for them, can help those people better deal with those circumstances. We're not saying the circumstances aren't real. We're just saying how you show up to those circumstances is coming from inside of you and the way you see the world. And if that can shift, you can do better in those circumstances. You can have, at the very least, a better experience of that situation. And often it can help you see ways to improve that situation.
It's just hopeful, isn't it, really, I think.
Yeah, that's a good summary.
And I feel like the freshness is something that I feel like I want to just give a moment to, because I think we've all had that experience of being tangled in something, and then for whatever reason we come into a place where we breathe and you take a sort of a moment, and suddenly something comes in from nowhere that's so sensible and so previously unthought about, that's so helpful to the situation that you're in, that doesn't happen when you're in that agitated, sped up place. And I think we've all been sort of saying the same thing in different ways. That's the freshness. That's when you're better equipped, as you said, Frank, just now, to deal with the situation that you're in. As you said, the situation doesn't change. It's your ability to manage it, or to do the things that might be more helpful in that situation. And knowing that where we are coming from can shift at any moment, and knowing that you don't have to be in this tangled mess. That I'm not explaining myself very clearly, but
no, you did.
No, you are.
That was lovely.
Yeah.
It just means you can navigate, doesn't it? You navigate better. There's more ease.
Yeah.
Follow the feeling. If you're feeling like crap, don't go that way.
Yeah.
You have free will, and it's that choice, isn't it, to be able to see that and navigate or readjust and not go down that rabbit hole, and be able to then follow that good feeling and go with that thinking. You know, it really is as, it sounds really simple, but it is that simple, isn't it?
It's
You know,
that simple.
it's that simple.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's probably
So
worth.
freeing.
Sorry.
So
I mean, I don't know how anybody has come to be listening to this, but they might not know, although none of us personally have been, actually maybe you have, David. I was going to say that this understanding is being shared in, you know, in a number of contexts where you might think that those people have circumstances which are very difficult. So, you know, people living in prisons, there's people working with the homeless, there's people working with those that have addictions, there's people working with young kids in schools that are being bullied. You know, these are all contexts where you could say, but those are real problems, not just, you know, I'm depressed today. But this is actually proving to be something that's extremely helpful for those people, you know, where it would seem that this would really be put to the test. And interestingly, they actually find it generally a lot easier to make sense of this than people who have an easier life, is what I've heard some of the teachers say.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay, I think that's our time. But that's been an interesting one today. Thank you guys so much for joining. You know, moving forward, if anybody's listening and would like more information, we will carry this on in some capacity. There's lots on the website and the Facebook page to sort of catch up on if this is the first thing you're listening to. And we've all done a program with Aaron Turner at One Thought, and he's got a great resource available at One Thought Online that's got some free modules and stuff. But if you want to explore and hear more about this, and that's, I don't know, I think you'd all agree that that's a good place to start, isn't it, really? Aaron's got a lovely way of speaking to this.
Definitely.
Yeah, but just thank you guys so much for joining me. And yeah.
A pleasure, Bron, as ever.
Well, thanks for organising.
thanks, Bron.
Okay, bye.